Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement. And today, we have a special guest, Sidney Fry. Sidney, say hello.
Hello, John. Hello, Sam.
Sam, say hello.
How's it going?
I'm doing fantastically. You know, recently, obviously, the news cycle has been pretty negative, and we watch all this turmoil in the world, and you hear people screaming, you know, U.S. doesn't have any authority any longer. We don't have the same level of influence. And you kind of start questioning just exactly what's going on. Is the United States still the world's primary hegemon? Do we still wield the same authority as we would maybe like to think that we always have? And I guess that maybe I'm looking for some generational differences here. I mean, after all, I'm Gen X. I'm old enough to remember, believe it or not, Sidney, when the tanks went rolling into Saigon. I was just a little bit short of my 7th birthday. And so, you know, later on when Annie was in junior high or high school, she asked me all these questions about the Vietnam War. And I said, I don't know. And she goes, well, why don't you know? I said, it wasn't history when I was in school. And then kind of fast forward to the early Iraqi war. And, you know, all of a sudden you kind of take a look at things. All this stuff is ancient history for you guys. But for me, I remember back in the day. And I also remember growing up thinking that we were always the good guys. And we were taught that and we fervently believed it. I'm questioning whether or not you all do.
Yeah, I think our generation, each generation kind of learns more and more about what's actually gone on. And I don't think...
Familiarity breeds contempt.
I don't think that's been a great thing. And I think you can clearly see that with kind of the anti-U.S. rhetoric or the almost shame people are teaching to have about being an American. And I think it's definitely... And some is rightfully so. We have done things wrong. And I think that's the biggest difference going generation to generation is the amount of information and the missteps and mistakes that you've seen the U.S. make starts to kind of breed some contempt.
I mean, Sidney, okay, now you got Gen X being taught that, hey, U.S. is Superman. I mean, Sam's Gen Z saying, Superman perhaps, but a pretty flawed one.
Yeah.
I mean, how about your generation, millennials? I mean, how are you feeling about that?
I'm an 82. I'm an early millennial.
You see, I would have thought you were a younger person than that.
No, but so I grew up on textbooks, grew up in encyclopedias, pre-internet.
Likewise.
I do think now there's so much more access to information and opinions.
Yeah.
Not having grown up with that and having evolved in my 20s to having more access to it, a lot has changed now that I see a lot more people's perspectives, I think.
I guess, certainly that makes sense. And Sam, do you even know what an encyclopedia is?
I do know what an encyclopedia is.
All right. How about this one? Do you remember your mother buying an encyclopedia set with S&H green stamps?
No.
All right, I do. So that's how old I am. Even Sydney's questioning that.
I know. I don't know what the S&H green stamps are, but I remember buying encyclopedia sets.
I had a World Book and also had a Funk and Wagnalls.
A what?
Funk and Wagnalls. It's not
Be clear with how you...
It's not a folk duo. It's actually a brand of encyclopedia. On all seriousness, though, when we take a look at everything going on around in the world, you see what's happening in the Middle East. You see what's happening in Eastern Europe. You see the provocations in the South China Sea. And it's understandable why the average American is going, hey, this wouldn't have happened not so long ago. Clearly the U.S. is in decline. And however, when I go to Pew Research and take a look at things, maybe our perceptions of our standing in the world are a little bit more negative than they should be. Because when you go and take a look at opinion polls about the U.S., they're still mostly favorable around most of the world. However, I do have to put a caveat out there. And Sam, I think you might understand where I'm going with this. Most of the favorable opinions are from the global north.
Yeah.
The less favorable opinions are from the global south.
It's probably still declined, though, hasn't it?
A little bit. But it's actually, during the Biden administration, it's up from where it was in the Trump administration. Probably not that much of a surprise.
No, I don't think that's a surprise. But I think, even here when we talked about how people no longer trust everything from the government to police to mom and pop businesses.
I still don't. I still have a hard time with that. How can't you trust mom and pop?
Right, but everything has kind of gone down. That content has gone down pretty much across the board. And I think from my generation and people my age's perspective, you've seen what we've done and some of these conflicts that we've gotten involved with and American lives that have been lost in continents and countries that people probably didn't even know existed before a lot of people here, frankly, whether it's in Africa, even what we've done in did in Panama in the 80s and 90s, what have you. I mean, we have sent Americans and had lives lost in countries fighting other people's problems. And I think that has really started to rub people wrong, and has when you've already started to step away from this pride about being an American, and on top of that, sending other people to go die in battles.
Now, Sidney, this is going to be kind of a loaded question, one that you might have a difficult time answering it, but I'm prone to do such things.
Okay.
All right. Now, if you lived in the global south, which is essentially the former third world for all intents and purposes, and you were to view the United States and see what we've done in places like Grenada, you've left that one out, Panama is another good example, what we did in the second Iraq war, what we did in Afghanistan, what we've done in a number of different places, come in and killed a lot of people and then kind of left. If you're in the global south, how would you view the United States?
Given those circumstances, I would probably have a really hard time seeing us as the hero that we portray ourselves to be here.
Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's, and I think it's not black and white. I think there's things that, whether it's Somalia, these humanitarian crises that, World Health organizations and the UN kind of almost have to get involved with.
Yeah.
I think some things like that are different, but there's so many time after time conflicts that we could point to, and a lot that people still probably haven't even heard of and say, I'm not sure why we sent U.S. citizens down there to die.
Yeah, well, I think you're fair. You're absolutely right on that, and I think most of the respondents in the polls that I've seen, Pew Research being an excellent example of it, would say that the U.S. butts in too much in other countries' affairs, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. They do say U.S. technology and entertainment is still the tops in the world. However, in order to win over the global South and get America's, if you will, prestige back or influence back, what do you all think some of the things we could or should be doing? And then I'll tell you what I think would happen.
Well, you go first.
Well, I'll go first. Larry Summers. You know who that is?
Yes, yeah.
Almost said Larry
I don't know who
Sanders.
that is.
I used to be U.S. Secretary Treasurer and all that stuff. He's bigwig. He said that he was talking to someone, a nameless, faceless diplomat or something like that from the third world, and said, and I'm going to paraphrase what Summers said about the diplomat, who he is paraphrasing, so it's a paraphrase of a paraphrase.
Telephone.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that. It's going to be completely different. He said what he said the diplomat said was, "Hey, we like your guys' ideals more than we like China. However, when we engage with the Chinese, we get airports. When we engage with the Americans, we get lectures." And so that's kind of funny and sort of not a funny way. Or there is some truth to that, because when you take a look at what China has done with what is the Asian and Infrastructure Development Bank, which funds the Belt and Road Initiative, some $160 billion worth of infrastructure commitments around the entire world, most of them in the global South. And when you think about building railways from the coast in Kenya all the way up to Nairobi, when you take a look at building mines in Angola and oil fields and what have you, the Chinese are coming here and doing this with their money. Of course, they want to get repaid. Don't get me wrong. Whether or not they will is anyone's best guess. However, I think it's going to take that sort of engagement, that sort of economic development coming with railroads and roads and schools and hospitals, as opposed to blanket aid, NGOs driving around and Range Rovers and preaching Wilsonian democracy.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate on that one, and there's been some good...
And with that, thank you all so much for listening.
No, but there's been, good articles and people pointing out what's the Chinese actual goal with all of this.
I think the Chinese actual goal is to control all the mines in Africa.
Right. They're making loans that I think they're probably somewhat comfortable not being repaid on and taking on the assets from it. What... I guess it's somewhat nationalistic, but why is that even our job? Is that still the U.S.'s job to be going and developing economies in other countries when at times, we're talking about whether there's a recession here next year or the year after, nonetheless, we're spending too much money. At what point do you have to take care of your own home first? Well,
I'm going to let Sidney answer that one. Sidney, what do you think?
Well, my question to you with all of this, too, was tying it back, same thing to the debt. If we have, y'all are constantly talking about, I say y'all as in our economist here, talking about the nation's debt. So how do we pay to build these hospitals, to do all this infrastructure in other countries where, to Sam's point, at what point do we help ourselves?
Well, I will tell you, that's the difference between should be doing and can we do it. I mean, should we be doing? We should have been doing this sort of stuff. Can we do it right now? We're probably out of money and certainly out of public sentiment in order to do this. We've had a very, very difficult time going into Malawi and putting up an interstate system there. Wouldn't even be used for the most part. I mean, not enough automobiles down there. When the potholes aren't filled in the U.S. and when the public education system arguably is not where it needs to be, you're going to have to be hard pressed in order to get American voters to go for that. However, that also does mean that we do allow the Chinese to have a greater sort of, bigger stick or bigger bat or carry greater clout throughout 70% of the world's population. So you could argue it's almost a Secretary of State or State
Cold
Department
War-esque kind of thing.
Exactly. And so that is if we don't mind China taking over the influence that the U.S. has had really since the end of the Second World War.
To me, it begs the question: where did that influence get us? I'm not sure the answer is.
Cynicism.
I'm not sure that answer is necessarily
Cynicism,
that great.
right name is Sam.
But yeah, look, the interest payments, not to just focus on the debt, but the interest payments are going to balloon on our debt over the next couple of years. It seems like now of any time is, I used this with a client meeting last week, it feels like we almost need to put our own oxygen mask on before we start helping other people.
But what if it doesn't inflate? I'm always worried about that.
Yeah, well, I've never had to actually use one, so... but you have to be able to take care of yourself at home first. And we've talked about the Chinese economy is not doing too
I was
great
just about
right
to
now.
ask.
And so that starts to beg the question, how is this going to work for them? Because I'm not sure some of these assets that they may be taking over or these defunct loans that they've put out to some of these global South countries, they're in a tough spot right now too. I'm not sure that this Cold War of global South countries is necessarily as big of an asset as maybe us or the Chinese had previously thought it would be.
Sidney, what do you think?
I'm going to let you two continue to speak on this one because I don't know as much. I don't know as much about the internal Chinese economy. When I think bigger picture, I wonder: is it better to help others before it is to help ourselves? In some cases, yes, but I do think we've got a lot we need to deal with here.
I would tell you, I might make an economic spin on this and tell you why maybe some decent investment in some of these places ahead of time will pay off much bigger fruit down the road. And I think if the Chinese aren't going to try to get the mines, not trying to get the oil fields, they at least want to make sure that they've got access to them. And so I think these are actually pretty smart investments. The Chinese aren't doing this stuff in Angola out of the goodness of their hearts.
Of course not.
Yeah, they're not building roads in Kampuchea or Cambodia
But are
out
we?
of the goodness. We're not doing any of it. With some, that's
Just buying the diamonds and the oil.
buying the diamonds and the oil. We do. Obviously, we've got some investment over in these places, but I will tell you this: if you take a look at demographic trends, Sam, Sidney, where's the population growth going to be over the next 30 years? Is it going to be in the global north or the global south?
The South. We're below replacement level in a lot of the G7 countries.
Yeah, so when you take a look at that, you see where the population growth is going to be. Population growth means consumers, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, here we have it. 70% of the population will probably swell to 80% of the population, maybe by 2050, if not even greater than that. This is where the population growth is going to be. This is where the consuming growth is going to be. And then you have countries like India, where it's estimated they'll have a so-called middle class of 500 million people in the not-so-distant future, although they still have 1.4 billion out there, still plenty of poor people, but just tons of potential buying power. Going out there now with a diplomatic, quote, investment could produce economic dividends down the road. And would that be a better use of our so-called aid as opposed to just cutting a blank check to a kleptocrat in Rwanda or something like that?
I think it probably would be, but we've talked in for many different reasons about how strong the U.S. consumer is, and I think that's really where we get our power as a country, is how much we spend money and how strong we are as consumers. That it makes we've people like to say, oh, China owns 10% of our debt, but really that's almost kind of a gift to them for us taking in all their exports. These countries are so heavily reliant on us, and I think are going to continue to be heavily reliant on us until they start to be import countries and not export countries. And I think that if that ever occurs, is a long, long, long way away.
So, I mean, going back to sort of you touched on our trade imbalance with the Chinese. Economics professor of mine in graduate school, a guy named Dr. Barry Brownstein, brilliant guy, said, why do we worry about our trade deficit? He goes, we give them these scripts of green paper that are intrinsically worthless, and they give us finished products.
Right. I think there's a huge misconception around Chinese buying U.S. debt. That's how it has to work to balance out. If we're going to be taking in a lot of assets that they produce, they have to be taking assets in, and
on the other side,
and it has to balance out, and a large chunk of that's going to be treasuries.
All right, now I'm going to flip this back over a little bit more on topic to Sidney. I understand that she has smallish children, not necessarily in physical and stature, just smallish children.
They're pretty small.
Yeah,
They're young. My oldest will be 9 on Thursday.
You see,
we'll put it that way.
My oldest will be, my youngest will be 22 tomorrow. So let's think about this. Let's put John aside and all that stuff, and I'm going to think of you as a mom. What do you think about in terms of just how the turmoil is going around the world? If U.S. influence continues to wane, what does that mean for younger people coming through the system in a world where the U.S. is no longer the world's hegemon, and perhaps the potential for the U.S. to get involved in more armed conflicts? How does that make you feel?
You mean, how does that impact me as a consumer?
How does that impact you as a person?
Getting involved in more conflicts?
Yeah.
I think as a parent, that involves a lot more conversation around what's going on and why it's happening and what that means. I think it's scary.
Well, I think it's real scary. Back during the first Iraq War, 90, 91 or thereabouts, I was just coming out of college, and shoot, I didn't have any dependents. I wasn't married. We were pretty scared of the Iraqi army, which was the 4th largest in the world at the time. And I certainly didn't want to go die for war. Well, Sam, your thoughts?
No, and even beyond, there's fear when you talk about people with being draft eligible or soon to be. I'm not concerned about getting to the point where you even have a draft, but my concern...
There was one?
That's
a line from Stripes, I'm sorry.
Okay, well...
You missed us on that one.
But even people who willingly sign up for the military, I think idealistically at least think they're going to be serving their country in ways that are really meaningful and deep, and whether it's after 9/11 or World War II or something where you're really fighting for your country. And I think we have so many troops in so many places that if it were my kid that signed up to go defend our country and died in some global south country that I may not even be able to point out on a map, serving a conflict that has nothing to do.
We've had deaths in Chad.
Yeah. We've had deaths in probably more countries than not at this point. And I think that's the part that would continue to frustrate people. Less so, if we were getting attacked and going to fight a war to actually defend our country.
So this kind of begs the question, and maybe there are generational differences. Obviously, my parents' generation would say, no, we need to carry a big stick. We need to enforce our will. My generation, Gen X, probably not so much. A little bit more jaundiced, a little bit more cynical than previous generations. So what about you all? What about let's say U.S. influence is waning? Does that bother you, Sidney?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think about U.S. influence, going back to warfare, not that I want to spend any more time on that, but the potential of what other countries, what kind of technology they have and what they can use on us, that scares me. And when you're not the biggest dog in the room, knowing that you're vulnerable to that, I don't know. That kind of terrifies me.
All right, Sam, you.
I think it's hard to separate the militaristic strength and then the economic strength of it too. I think those two things go hand in hand for different reasons.
Okay.
If the Chinese start poking the bear, being us, how does that impact our exports?
Maybe we should say poking the eagle, because the bear is Russia.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So how that impacts it, we're going to be the economic superpower, at least for the foreseeable future, with the consumer that we have. And, I think if our military is focused on defending us, that's something that we do need to focus on. And I think less so on focusing on other countries and people's issues.
So the Belt and Road Initiative, China can do whatever the heck it wants, and really it just doesn't impact us, so why do we care? Is that basically it?
I'm there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sidney, how about you?
If it doesn't impact us, so why do we care?
Yeah.
But it impacts a lot of other people.
But if it impacts them mostly in a positive way, is that good or bad?
I'm going to say that's good.
All right. I and that's one of those ones where I'm kind of might be with you all there. It's, I was trying to play devil's advocate a little bit. I'm not very good at it, talking about is this going to be a good economic investment? The truth is a railroad from the seaport in Kenya to Nairobi is probably never going to be a very good investment. A railroad from Eritrea into Addis Ababa is probably not going to be a very good investment. However, does it benefit or make the lives of those people that are using it, is that better? Yeah, sure, why not? And so that's actually almost kind of a good thing if that means the Chinese have access to some mines or some stuff coming out of Africa. Okay, it doesn't bother me terribly much. And all that means is their goods will be that much cheaper for having better access to raw materials, and that's good for the U.S. consumer until it isn't. And then at such time, all of a sudden, Africans might not like the way the Chinese behave.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that gets to be a problem for the Chinese. So ultimately, I think maybe some of the thought process of American declining influence around the world, I think it's probably misplaced. We still care. We're still the world's biggest, baddest, big guy, bully, what have you out there. Not going to be replaced in both economic and military terms for a very long period of time. The only country that has potential to do it would be China. And China's running out of economic growth right now. And by the way, their population is going to start shrinking pretty mightily over the next 20 years. And as a result, their economic activity will slow to a crawl, and Beijing will have to start worrying more about what's happening in the Middle Kingdom as opposed to what's happening in Africa.
Yep.
How's that for nerdy, huh?
That's a pretty rapid assessment right there that I could not have done.
It's a good thing I'm already married, because with those types of lines, I'd never be able to get a date. All right, well, guys, thank you all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, where you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we've got to say or how we think, you can always go to oakworth.com, take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab, and find links to all kinds of exciting topics, including links to previous podcasts of Trading Perspectives, as well as links to our blog, Common Sense, and finally links to our quarterly magazine, Macro and Market. With that, I'm going to give you guys one last chance to say something really brainy on this controversial topic. Sidney?
Oh, I don't know about brainy today.
That's all I got.
Sam, that's all you got? All right. That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.